You are listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I'm your host, Alan Peterson, and you're listening to episode number 54. In this episode, I am interviewing Kyle Mills, who is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 16 political thrillers. He recently took over writing the Mitch Rapp series for the late Vince Flynn, and has also contributed books to a series created by Robert Ludlum. Kyle initially found inspiration from his father, an FBI agent and the former director of Interpol, and still draws on his contacts in the intelligence community, including the FBI, CIA, MI6, and Special Forces, to give his books their realism. Avid outdoor athlete, he and his wife have lived in Jackson Hole, Wyoming for over 20 years. His latest book is Enemy of the State, which I highly recommend, and it's the third book in the Mitch Rapp series written by Kyle Mills. And it was published on September 5th, and it's already in the top 3 of the New York Times bestseller list for hardcover and combined print and ebook fiction. And it's number 4 on the Amazon charts for the top 20 most sold and most read books of the week. I chatted with Kyle about his books, his fascinating background, his writing process, and we also chatted about the first Mitch Rapp movie that just came out, American Assassin, starring Dylan O'Brien and Michael Keaton. Saw that movie yesterday, and it was awesome. So a lot of fun stuff that we talked about. So here is my interview with Kyle Mills. How you doing, Kyle?
I'm doing good.
Thank you so much for agreeing to be on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I
was reading your background, and it's so fascinating. Your father was an FBI agent, and so you wrote on your website you grew up as a bureau kid. What was that like? And has that type of background helped you writing all these thrillers?
Oh, yeah, it was really fun. And definitely, I mean, it's kind of the reason I picked this genre to write in, because I had so many contacts in that industry. It's all the people I grew up with. You know, I was always surrounded by FBI and some spec ops guys and MI6 and CIA. So those were all characters I had in my head, and you'd hear the stories and stuff, and all that eventually kind of makes its way into your books.
Also, from your bio, you had mentioned that it was your wife that had given you the idea of perhaps writing a novel back when you were in your banking days. So was that like the first time you thought about it, or were you like always kind of thinking about someday I'm going to write a book? How did that come about?
No, I think I'm probably different than most people that get into this business. I had never considered writing a book. I'd never done any creative writing at all. I worked at a bank, and I was a really fanatical rock climber, and so that's kind of the way I spent my days. But I wanted to do something creative, and honestly, my idea was to build furniture. But my wife reminded me I wasn't very handy, and that was kind of true. So she suggested, oh, well, how about writing a novel? Because I would love to read. I did a lot of reading. And, I thought it didn't seem like that good of an idea. I'd never really studied creative writing or done any. But after a while, I thought, it's really just the creative exercise. It's not like, you necessarily think you're going to get published or anything. So I bought some how to write a novel books and kind of set out on it.
And when you first sat to write your first novel, was that the one that ended up getting published? Was that Rising Phoenix?
Yeah.
Wow.
I wrote that book. It was kind of the fastest book I ever wrote, oddly. I honestly didn't really have any strong expectation that it would get published. Some people had read it, and they said they liked it and all that. But I decided to, try to get it published, which is a whole other world, sort of soul-crushing world of trying to get an agent and all that, particularly for somebody like me with no background at all. I finally did get an agent, and he sold it, and it went on to be a national bestseller. So I ended up signing a 2-book deal, which was a little weird because I honestly had never thought about writing a second book. It never really crossed my mind.
Did you leave your banking job at that time, or did you hold on for a little bit?
I did because, the second book's a little bit of a job. The first one, you don't have any pressure. You get to do whatever you want. There's certainly no promotion or anything that has to be done with it. And with that book becoming a national bestseller, there was a lot of pressure and deadlines and all these things that had to be dealt with. And it was an industry I was completely unfamiliar with. So the stress of it, honestly, was really awful. It was one of the worst years of my life because I knew I had written that one book, but I honestly didn't know if I could write two. I'd had an idea that I was interested in, and now I had to make up an idea and create a book and all that, and with a lot of people in New York kind of pulling me this way and that way. It was a very different experience to do it kind of professionally than as a fun exercise.
And was your second book, was it like part of that Rising Phoenix series, or were those standalones?
No, that was part of the Mark Beeman was the character in that series. And so that book ended up becoming a New York Times bestseller and kind of kicked off the career because actually Tom Clancy had told me, if you can do two, you can do 100. But, some people only have one in them. Which was not helpful, honestly, to my stress level. But I managed to do two, so I thought, I can do 100 now.
Was the third one a little bit easier, or was it still kind of stressful?
It was still hard. I was still getting my legs under me, kind of figuring out how to write a book. I mean, it's a very weird sensation, at least it was for me, because I felt like an imposter. I was not a writer. I'd never done it before. And so you kind of, every time you'd kind of get into a situation with, other writers or publishing people or whatever, you'd think, God, someday one of these people are going to find out that I'm just faking it. And eventually I got over that. I figured out how, you have to figure out what your process is, and that takes a little while, to stop doing it like other people told you to do it and do it in a way that works for you, and to start feeling like that you're not an imposter and that you really can do this and are doing it.
So I'm curious now about, you mentioned you bought a couple how-to books. Do you remember which ones those were?
I bought a bunch of them, actually. The two that sort of stuck in my mind, though, were, I think it was called Writing the Blockbuster Novel. I think that's by Zuckerberg.
Oh, yeah, L. Zuckerman, I think.
Yeah, Zuckerman.
Yeah. Ken Follett's editor.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great one.
And one called Self-Editing for Fiction Writers, which I think the guy's name was, they had a couple of writers, but one's name was King, I think. That was a really good one, too, about the mechanics of good writing, of good novel writing. Not less about plot, but about, how to work with point of view and all these things that I had no understanding of at all. I actually read that book and I had to completely rewrite my first novel because I hadn't even understood the concept of point of view. And I read that chapter and was like, oh no. So I went back and fixed it all.
So that was before you even sent it out for query? You went back and...
Yeah, before I sent it out.
Yeah. Were you a fan of thrillers as a reader before that? Or?
Yeah, definitely. I'd been reading them since I was a little kid. I started reading adult novels at a very young age, I think because my parents had them and we didn't have a lot of money, and I don't think they went out and bought kids books for me specifically. So I can remember Stephen King's book, the Salem's Lot, reading it in hardback when it came out, and I think I would have been 9 at the time. I actually looked recently because I just reread it. And then I stuck with that, with that genre. Well, not entirely that genre, but a lot of thrillers and horror and stuff like that. And that was kind of my primary diet. I wouldn't say I didn't like fantasy. I never could get behind that. Never really read science fiction. I just so kind of I did read some general literary stuff occasionally and thrillers.
And what were some of your favorite authors? And did you find that later on they influenced you in your writing at all? Or?
Yeah, I think probably my favorite was Tom Clancy. I thought we kind of invented sort of a subgenre, and I thought he was kind of the total package. I think he did virtually everything well. And I loved the complex Cold War thriller. He fit right into that. And in fact, I kind of patterned, I think Cardinal of the Kremlin is maybe the best modern thriller ever written. And I actually patterned a book called Sphere of Influence. I mean, it's nothing like Cardinal of the Kremlin, but it was the same idea of the sort of complex thriller. But that's what I was shooting for.
And do you, when you're writing your books, do you put in a lot of the research beforehand, almost like Clancy style?
Yeah, I mean, I do a fair amount of research beforehand, so I kind of know what I'm talking about on those subjects. I wouldn't say that I do all the nitty gritty research though until I'm done with the book. I have a symbol like 2 question marks. So if I say something I'm not sure about, I put 2 question marks, and then when the draft is done, I'll go back and clear all those question marks. And the reason is because, when you're writing along, sometimes you change your mind. So it's not really worth spending a lot of time researching something and then deciding to delete it from the book.
Now, your writing process, do you have a big outline before you start to write, or you just sort of get going? Yeah? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I write probably the longest outlines, sort of psychotically long outlines, really. I mean, I just started this week writing the new book, and so it'll be about 110,000 words, I suspect, when it's done. And my outline is 40,000 words.
Oh wow, that's like a small novel.
Yeah, it's done. Essentially, it's done. I just need to turn the outline into every chapter in the outline into prose, mm-hmm. And that also allows me something and again, this goes back to how do you learn your process. So one of the unusual things I learned about myself is that if I write outlines that detailed, I don't have to write the book in order. So I can write whatever chapter I feel like, and which I find really helpful.
What do you use? Do you use like Microsoft Word or yeah?
Yeah, because that has a good Word's the only thing I've ever found that has a really good outlining function. Like I looked like changing to Google Docs or something, but nothing else has an outlining function. So I just do the outline in the outlining function and then write on top, and then I just change it to the normal format and write on top of it, basically. There's a lot of stuff in the outline that I can just use.
So now you've picked up the torch for 2 very iconic characters, Robert Ludlum's Jason Bourne and of course Vince Flynn's Mitch Rapp. How was that? I mean, was that like nerve-wracking for you to take on at first, or were you like, all right, I'm ready for the challenge?
Well, with the Ludlum stuff, I didn't actually write the Bourne stuff. Eric von Lustbader does. I wrote a different series called Covert One. Mm. So that was a different challenge. I mean, they called me kind of out of the blue to do that, and I was working on another book, and I kind of initially turned it down, and I started thinking, I've been a big fan of Ludlum. And I thought, maybe it would be a fun change of pace. I don't even know how many novels I'd written by then, probably more than 10. To do something different. And I had a lot of free hand there because they were trying to reboot a series that had kind of gone fallow. So, and it was science oriented, and I had some science oriented ideas that I had really never written under my own name. I didn't know if they'd really fit. This was a great opportunity to do that. So I basically wrote some books with their characters that I had been wanting to write. So a fairly easy thing to do in theory, not like taking on Robert Ludlum's style too much. Mm-hmm. That series had been written by a number of authors over the years. I wouldn't say there was a lot of consistency to it. So so I stopped doing that, and I finished that project. I wrote 3 books for that, and started working on my own book again that I had sort of left in a drawer, and I took on the Ludlum stuff. Then, I got a call from Vince Flynn's family to see if I would like to continue the Mitch Rapp series. That was a very different challenge. Vince had died kind of at the height of his powers and popularity, and that was a very iconic character, and it had a very specific universe and a specific style that fans were used to and liked. That was a little more nerve-wracking because it was pretty clear that I was not going to be able to write my own novels to some extent I had with the Ludlum books. And to some extent that's what they wanted. This was very much about kind of forging Vince Flynn novels, which I honestly thought was a super interesting challenge. I mean, I liked Vince's novels. I thought his character was great. The idea of he'd written 3 pages, the first one. So the idea of trying to write a book and put those 3 pages in there and see if fans could figure out which 3 pages they were was kind of interesting to me. So I took it on.
When you first took that on, I mean, did you have access to Vince Flynn's, notes or outlines, or you just had those 3 pages?
It's funny. It's kind of a life lesson in asking questions and a job interview, I had assumed that, actually, Tom Clancy didn't really write outlines, but, I had assumed that anybody who writes novel-length fiction, particularly thriller fiction, was just kind of complex in the plotting, like from a plot standpoint, that everybody would take note or do some kind of an outline and do their research and all that before they started. So when I took it on, I said, okay, great, I'll do it, but go ahead and send me all, Vince's stuff for the book. And they kind of said, well, what do you mean? And I said, call his wife, Lisa, and there'll be a box in his office of all, outlines and research and all that. And it turns out Vince didn't write that way at all. He just kind of sat down and started with page 1 and wrote the book. So those 3 pages, which really were 2.5 pages, were all that existed of that book.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's kind of like Lee Child style. So he just kind of sits down and starts writing, starts typing.
Yeah, and it turns out more authors than I thought do it that way, and it really wouldn't work for me. I can't imagine writing a book like that.
So is there a balance that you need to maintain when you're adapting to the Vince Flynn style versus your own, or is it, now that you're got 3 books under your belt, is it getting a little bit different now about that, or how does that process work?
Yeah, I mean, the first one, The Survivor, was clearly a forgery. I mean, my goal was to write that book, just make it absolutely seamless between The Last Man, which is the first book he wrote, or the last book he wrote. Then, he had those 3 pages, and then to continue on, and no one would ever be able to tell the difference. I mean, I studied his word choice, his sentence structure, how he handled action sequences. I went back and read and took notes on the entire series, so I knew exactly where the universe stood and who all the characters were, and that was a very specific challenge. Moving forward, I mean, it wasn't really sustainable. Maybe it would have been sustainable, but I don't think the books would have been very good because the world changes, and the Mitch Rapp character has to continue to evolve. I mean, he'd been evolving since he was 23 years old in the series, and I couldn't just freeze him, and I couldn't freeze the plot lines because the world has changed. Vince never even had heard of ISIS, passed away. So with the later books, it's a little bit more of a blend. I mean, they're still very much Vince Flynn books. I'm constantly conscious to write in his style and not my own, but I'm a little freer, I think, in evolving the character and adapting the plots to what's going on in the world today.
And how has your relationship with fans of Vince Flynn changed from book 1 to book 3? Because I mean, I know at first probably there was a lot of apprehension, but I think now you've been pretty much welcomed now, and we're all enjoying your books. Have you noticed the change at all from the beginning to now?
Yeah, everybody was great. The fans were great. I have to say, I was prepared for a fair amount of like, say, apprehension on their part. I did not expect to be accepted until I had proved myself. And I wouldn't necessarily say that was the case. I mean, I feel like everybody was rooting for me. They loved Vince. They loved the books. And they wanted to see his legacy and the character continue. I mean, that wasn't necessarily the case when I took it on. People could have looked at it in a very different way, a much more negative way. So, if I hadn't performed and I'd written a terrible book about Mitch, or I'd written my own book about him, I think there probably would have been a lot of backlash. But I think everybody appreciated clearly, even if you didn't like The Survivor, how much effort I put into it. And so now I think now people trust me with the character. That's made, I mean, again, everybody's always been wonderful to me, but it's made me feel a little bit better in being a little less nervous every time I write a book, every time it comes out, sitting there wondering if this is going to be the one where people completely dump on me. So yeah, it's a little less stressful.
And I was curious too, because you were already a successful author of your own books. Did your fans now become reading Mitch Rapp, or was it all commingled already in the thriller genre? Or I
think a lot of it was commingled because Vince was such a huge author. I think a lot of my fans, and certainly a lot of them emailed and said, "Hey, I've always loved Mitch Rapp. I'm interested to see what you do with him." Though I think a lot of them also recognized that my writing style was really different than Vince's. So I think some of them were a little surprised that I had taken it on, as opposed to somebody who wrote more in a more military kind of style, like an military action thriller style, which is not. I don't think anybody would describe my thrillers necessarily that way.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed the latest Enemy of the State, which has been out for about a week right now. It's September 5th it came out.
Yep.
Yeah, and you really touched, like you mentioned earlier, on things that weren't around when Vince Flynn was writing his books, like ISIS, and you also kind of touch into like the whole Saudi connection in this type of world. How did that plot come about? And were you a little bit nervous about going there?
Well, I think, with that plot, there are a couple of things. One, I was really, there had been, right when I was starting this book, there had been a lot of talk about the redacted pages about Saudi involvement in 9/11, and the possibility at that point of releasing those redacted pages. And then later you had the stuff on the lawsuit, the possibility of having lawsuits against the Saudi government for involvement in 9/11, and the idea that maybe the Saudi government was more involved in that and the Saudi royalty than was initially reported, because obviously we have a strategic interest in remaining friends with Saudi Arabia. And also, it seemed to fit within Vince's themes, because he had if you read his books, he had a pretty clear distaste for the Saudis. So they were, to some extent, many of his books have some sort of Saudi antagonist, even if they're not like the main guy, they're the financer or in some way involved. So it seemed like that plot line seemed like a good fit.
And now Mitch goes a little bit rogue in this book. What was your train of thought going down that road?
Well, that's sort of there are a few things that are really particularly fun about these books for me as sort of a fan, not necessarily as a writer, but as a fan, is that one, you can pull characters out of the past that you always wondered what happened to them, because Vince had a way of writing these cool characters and then sort of forgetting about them, and so they just go away, and you'd always think, well, what happened to Greta, or what happened to Donatella, or whatever, and so you can bring them back and find out what did happen to them. So that was one of the ideas behind it. But second, it's putting Mitch into situations he's not comfortable in. He would become pretty comfortable operating in the Middle East, and with his great, perfect team, Scott Coleman and a bunch of old spec ops guys. And so with this one, I wanted to bring back some characters, but I also wanted to put Mitch in a situation he'd never been in, which is I wanted to strip him of his backup, all the CIA and Scott Coleman's team and stuff like that, and make him deal with mercenaries and people with conflicting personalities and stuff like that, and have to have him manage that, which he's never really been forced to do before.
I really enjoyed that in the book. That was really cool to see his interactions now with all that, kind of being a freelancer, basically, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then seeing Donatella and, like you said, all those other characters, I really love that as well. Is that something that you're going to continue doing? Because now you recently signed you're going to be writing 3 more books, right? In Vince Flynn's universe?
Right. Yep.
Oh, that's awesome. That's very exciting when I read that you're going to continue writing these books.
Yeah, I'm really happy about it. It's been a lot of fun.
So is that something, are you going to be bringing back some of these older characters?
Yeah, I'd like to, when they fit into the books. I mean, definitely there are a lot of them back there that, that were really fun and well-drawn characters that Vince had created. And it's fun to be able to pluck from that. And it's also fun because Vince wrote at such a large scale and had so many fans, a lot of these fans remember these characters. So it's not like you're reintroducing them.
And how long is usually the process from when you first start outlining till the book is ready for publish? How long does that usually take?
I'm usually done with it in, let's see, a little less than a year. call it 10 months. And then it obviously there's editorial and all that. So probably start to finish about a year.
Are you given a lot of freedom now when writing the Mitch Rapp stories from like the publisher and the Flynn family, or how's?
Yeah.
Or you,
yeah. I mean, I always have. I mean, I run my general ideas by them. When I killed off a couple of really one major character, I asked them about that. But for the most part, I'm pretty autonomous.
On your Twitter feed, you were on a book tour for Enemy of the State. How did that go? Now, do you have any more planned for this year?
That was good. This was really chaotic because you've got the movie coming out and the book coming out all within a couple of weeks. So, I went on the book tour, did the movie premiere and all that. So always a lot of fun to go out and meet the fans and sign books and talk to people about people are really passionate, talk about the books and about the movie.
Yeah, I missed you by a day. I live in California, but I was visiting family in Minnesota, and I left the day that you were coming in because you were at the Roseville Barnes and Noble.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have been there for sure had I not left.
Oh, sorry you missed it. Yeah,
I just missed it by a day. So I have to ask about the movie because I'm excited. It's coming out today from the day we're recording this on Friday, and I'm gonna go watch it tonight. There's like a little bit of brouhaha in the beginning, as usually happens with these beloved characters or books get turned into movies about the casting of Dylan O'Brien. Mm-hmm. And you've already seen the movie, so what was your thoughts? And are you excited? Did he do a good job?
Yeah, I think Dylan was fantastic in the movie. He, it's funny when they first told me who was going to play him, I didn't know who Dylan was. I ran out and bought got the Maze Runner, which he'd been in. He's, exactly what I pictured. I think a lot of people have very kind of broad ideas about what a character is and what a character looks like. I guess everybody's interaction with people and with characters is pretty individual. But, Dylan's the exact right body type. He looks like Mitch Rapp was described. He is actually a really good actor, as it turns out. I mean, obviously, The Maze Runner was a very different role. And, he has that kind of anger and intensity and grittiness that Mitch had. So at that age, because you remember, this is American Assassin, so, Mitch is right out of college. And I think he was fantastic. In fact, I just told him last week that, forevermore, if I ever wrote a book about him at that age, he would be what I was picturing, because he really did, I think, bring it to life. And then Michael Keaton, what can you say about him? He's always great, and he was terrific as Stan Hurley.
Yeah, I can't go wrong with Michael Keaton, that's for sure.
No, he was great.
Well, I'm looking forward to watching that movie tonight. Is there anything you can tell us a little bit about about the next book that you're working on? Is it what part of the world it's going to be in, or any hints?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go back and touch on Russia again. I did that in Order to Kill, but it's such a big thing that's going on now with kind of the rise of Russia again onto the world stage, and the fact that they're a fairly destructive influence, I think, on the world. So I want to do that. I'm going to bring back a few characters again from the past, and sort of continue on with Mitch. And Mitch is trying to straighten out his life, and so he can find a little bit of happiness. We'll see if he can do that.
And so right now you're going to be focusing on the Mitch Rapp books. The other book you were working on your own that's still in the drawer for now.
Yeah, that's been like, I can't even know how many years, 7 years, and I've got about 10 pages. So that one, I'm afraid, is going to sit there for a while longer.
Well, I'm excited that you'll be writing some more Mitch Rapp books. So that's a good thing too. So, but I also recommend. I started reading Rising Phoenix because I was kind of curious about your first book, and I mean, yeah, that's a great thriller as well. I mean, I haven't finished it yet, but I just wanted to let you know that I've been enjoying that one as well.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's funny. That was a long time ago. So, I always wonder how people feel about reading stuff like that, because it's like, nobody has even cell phones or the internet or anything, which would seem kind of weird now.
Yeah, I actually kind of enjoy it. I mean, I remember the days before not having a cell phone and stuff. So,
Well, yeah, me too. But it was funny transition as a thriller writer because you had the old, people would be cut off and they'd be trying to find a payphone and all this stuff, and now you never are cut off.
Enemy of the State is doing so well. I was just curious. I just double checked. Number 2 on the New York Times for print and ebook. Number 4 most sold on Amazon right now. So it's been amazing. So that's really cool to see that that is being embraced like that. The reviews have been awesome.
Yeah, it is nice. It was definitely nerve-wracking to take over, and there was absolutely no way to anticipate how it would go. And it's kind of hard to imagine how it could be going better. I mean, you've got a really good movie, in my estimation anyway, coming out today. You've got, the fans are really enjoying the new book, and it's, at the top of the New York Times bestseller list. Yeah, the only negative thing I think in the world going on right now with this series is the movie It is doing so well.
Oh yeah,
but I think it's just impossible to be number one. I mean, who would have thought a reboot of a movie about an evil clown would debut like at almost $200 million?
Yeah, that was crazy. And there's some different genres, but that It is so huge right now that that's a tough competition for American Assassin.
Yeah, I mean, I would have never guessed. I thought, that's gonna, people like me. I thought I saw the miniseries; it was great. I don't need to watch it again. But apparently, a lot of people disagree with me.
Yeah, I still haven't watched it. I haven't watched the It movie, but now after all the hype, I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to go check it out. But American Assassin tonight, so maybe It next week.
Good, yeah. I'm boycotting It.
Yeah. Well, Kyle, I want to thank you so much for taking time to talking with me about your writing and Mitch Rapp and Vince Flynn. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it has been. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and then for people, I just want to double check. Your website is kylemills.com.
Yep.
And then you're on Twitter and Facebook at Kyle Mills Author, and they'll be able to find you there. And I'll have links on all that, but if people are listening, that's how they can find you.
Yep, they can find me there.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Meet the Thriller Author. I'd like to ask you to please review and rate this podcast over on iTunes. It really helps me get the word out. If you take a few seconds of your time to do that, it would be much appreciated. You can also visit my website at thrillingreads.com/podcast for show notes on this episode, as well as information about the podcast in general. And you can also sign up for my mailing list there. You'll be getting special offers from our guests, as well as information, behind-the-scenes information on the podcast. And please do visit my author website at alanpeterson.com. I appreciate your support. And so until next episode, I will talk to you then.